Sacramento Vampire, featuring Richard Chase. Full name, Richard Trenton Chase, Jr. Crimes and sprees. Richard, crime-wise, was known to take the lives of 6 people in Sacramento, California. Other than murders, he was known to be a cannibal, necrophiliac, and he is known to carry a schizoid personality. In other words, he had a form of personality disorder. Usually, whenever the murders had occurred, Richard would most of the time break into homes of residents. However, when he murdered his first known victim, it involved drive-by shooting rather than breaking into the home. His first victim was Ambrose Griffin, whom he used a gun to shoot from his vehicles to his. Richard had this strange Dracula-like behavior during the murders. He would knock at people's doors at first, then ask if they would let him in. Whenever they denied, which in a lot of cases that took place in, he wouldn't break in or go inside. However, when they said yes, it was reported he would turn away once before breaking the window and going inside and take the lives of the residents who lived inside the house he was allowed into. It was reported he would engage in arson-like activities, such as burning house downs or apartments that is ironically near his own flat. With the deceased bodies of victims, he would engage in necrophiliac. In addition, he was known to have an obsession with the body parts of females. One of his last murders involved murdering whole entire family using a shotgun, leading to severe blood loss and death. Crimes and Sprees Part 2. Other than the bodies of females, he was known to be obsessed with organs, leading him to keeping human insides in a jar and sometimes consuming them using a blender or fry pan to cook. It was reported other than murders, he would engage in animal cruelty along with grand theft auto and burglary. His murder spree had lasted from December 29, 1977 to January 27, 1978, basically a 1 month overall. Investigation. The investigation of the case of Richard involved a crucial role for the FBI. In addition, the manhunt involved local police officer Robert Ressler and the police department of Sacramento. It was inferred as an identity was created involving the description of a disorganized killer who carried mental illnesses, likely an unhygienic appearance, and likely lived near the victims due to the rapid, constant rate of deaths. One day, a female came to the police and reported a suspect. In fact, the female was actually a former high school classmate of Richard. In addition, the lady reported Richard had bloodstains on his shirt and sunken eyes, dead eyes in other words. It was noted the former classmate knew the address of Richard, leading to the officers arriving at the address and knocking on the door. However, Richard refused to open the door. In addition, the officer did not have a warrant. Therefore, it led to the authorities waiting outside the apartment of Richard, which Richard lived in. Minutes had reportedly passed until Richard came out his room with a blood-stained box. However, when he saw the police, it made him bolt away, leading to a minor chase, which eventually ended with a police ambush, cornering the serial killer before detaining him, also tackling him, which likely was painful. Anyways, the authorities took a look inside the apartment, along with the box, which led to the discovery of human and animal remains, and a .22 caliber revolver, and the belongings of the victims, such as keys and wallets. Investigation, Part 2. It was also discovered from the police there was a blender filled with blood and organs. It was noted Richard would circle the dates of his murders on his calendar, bloodstained by the way. When the police looked into the record of Richard, it was reported he was once arrested in Washoe, Nevada, due to the fact he was spotted jumping in a huge bucket of blood of a cow, though it was suspected the fluids belonged to a human. Trial and court proceedings. The trial and court proceedings of Richard Chase was publicized in addition to disturbing and gruesome. The plaintiff's side, the prosecutors, had argued legally Richard was sane when the murders had occurred. However, due to the fact there were many records of proof the actions of Richard were driven by mental illnesses and a medical condition, it took a 4-month court battle in Santa Clara County Superior Court. During the court, it was discovered Richard was involved in many other offenses other than murder, leading him to being arrested several times. Specifically, prosecutors Ronald Tochterman and Albert Locher argued that Chase was legally sane. The jury at the end of the court had rejected the insanity of Richard, leading to the sentence of first-degree murder on all 6 reported murders. He was declared to receive death penalty in a gas chamber. In the meantime, though, he was sentenced to death row in San Quentin, California State Prison. He was interviewed by the FBI multiple times. During their interviews, it was reported Richard had showed many forms of delusions and an unfortunate mental state. Specifically, Richard had said his heart was shrinking, his blood was drying out, his skull was stolen from his head. He was reportedly hunted by the Nazi and the UFO. His mother had poisoned him with dish soap as well, reportedly, and he thought he was forced to consume blood in order to replace his own. Childhood. The childhood of Richard was seemingly filled with domestic violence, physical abuse, and early signs of extreme psychological disturbance. He was born from his father, Richard Chase Sr., and his mother, who was reported to carry severe mental illnesses. At age 10, Richard began to suffer from the McDonald triad, a psychological theory that suggests negative future with predatory violence. He took the lives of many animals, in addition consuming their raw flesh and blood. Regardless of the actions he did, he never received any help he required and likely needed. In fact, it was reported his mother witnessed Richard drinking the blood of a cat, but did nothing to help the situation. In other words, Richard's mother ignored his behavior. His father, on the other hand, would frequently beat Richard along with his siblings, in addition adding a form of emotional abuse. Overall, the relationship with his parents was deeply unstable. In school for years, Richard was bullied by other students and peers, specifically during high school. Ironically, before high school, he wasn't as hated by his peers, and socially was not in a bad condition. Anyways, it was reported peers would create highly negative rumors of Richard. In addition, girls, which is the opposite gender of his, reportedly teased and made fun of him, insulting his physical appearance. Childhood, Part 2. This bullying had likely led to severe and heavy drug use towards marijuana, LSD, and alcohol. In addition, he began to develop aroused this belief if he consumed blood, the trauma in him would vanish. At age 15, it was recalled his parents had separated, leading to Richard being sent to Los Angeles to live with his relatives. His parents eventually made up a deal, leading to him going back to the roof of his abusive and unstable parents until he was 22 years old. However, when the divorce had officially been said between his parents when he was 22 years old, he was kicked out from his mother, leading to him having to get screened by his father every day when he stayed with his father. Crimes and sprees. Richard, crime-wise, was known to take the lives of 6 people in Sacramento, California. Other than murders, he was known to be a cannibal, necrophiliac, and he is known to carry a schizoid personality. In other words, he had a form of personality disorder. Usually, whenever the murders had occurred, Richard would most of the time break into homes of residents. However, when he murdered his first known victim, it involved drive-by shooting rather than breaking into the home. His first victim was Ambrose Griffin, whom he used a gun to shoot from his vehicles, to his. Richard had this strange Dracula-like behavior during the murders. He would knock at people's doors at first, then ask if they would let him in. Whenever they denied, which in a lot of cases that took place in, he wouldn't break in or go inside. However, when they said yes, it was reported he would turn away once before breaking the window and going inside, and take the lives of the residents who lived inside the house he was allowed into. It was reported he would engage in arson-like activities, such as burning house downs or apartments that is ironically near his own flat. With the deceased bodies of victims, he would engage in necrophilia. In addition, he was known to have an obsession with the body parts of females. One of his last murders involved murdering a whole entire family using a shotgun, leading to severe blood loss and death. Pivotal events. Richard Trenton Chase was born on the 23rd of May, 1950 in Sacramento, California. On 1976, Richard was hospitalized in a psychiatric hospital. He escaped from American River Hospital on May 18, 1976. He escaped but got caught on 1976 when he escaped from Beverly Manor Hospital. On August 1977, he was arrested in Washoe County, Nevada. Richard murdered his first victim on December 29, 1977. On January 28, 1978, Richard was arrested and held in custody. On 1979, Richard was sentenced to death penalty for his 6 first degrees of murders. Quotes from Richard Trenton Chase, Jr. An unlocked door was a personal invitation. I robbed them. Yes, I shot them dead. I'll do it again. What's one less person on the face of Earth anyway? I thought I was helping them. Killing people was something I had to do. They wouldn't take blood tests. I had to get blood my own way. Forensic inferences. The life of Richard Trenton Chase was tragically filled with fails along with many negative downsides. While at first his elementary school or likely his middle school years before high school began, he may have fitted in socially. However, likely when high school began, something in Richard began to grow, a sense of trauma. Though it was likely even before high school, there was some sort of conflict in his mental state, and it was ignored by his parents, neglected really. That likely made him think it was okay to hurt animals, and the thought he can hurt animals, he can do it to humans. In addition, his delusion began to form in high school, creating an unsettling persona. That persona likely was with him even when he committed the murder during the murders. Though it just got worse. He likely didn't kill for fun. He wanted to consume and satisfy his delusions in the wild due to the fact he had an obsession with the female bodies. So in the wild of the killings, he likely began to feel curious on the body parts of females and engaged in necrophilia. That obsession with females likely grew, especially during the breakups and the failed relationships he had. His family likely was irrelevant to him, despite accusing his mother on poisoning him with soap. He likely thought, and the trauma, especially from high school, likely stepped into another level, resulting in delusions on thinking he was being chased after from the UFO and other cults or mafia gangs. Overall, the lack of help Richard received likely had a major role throughout his life of crimes. Legacy and impact. The case of Richard Trenton Chase inspired stories related to vampires or Draculas due to the case's details. Richard is considered one of the most disorganized killers in America's history. In America, Richard remains one of the most unhygienic serial killers. Richard was failed to get the help he needed as a child. People began to lock their doors in Sacramento, California. Richard was considered a real-life Dracula or vampire. Richard's case is one of the rare cases FBI profiling had succeeded. Till this day, people fear to leave their doors unlocked due to the case of Richard Trenton Chase.